Okay, so maybe let's go a bit outside of the immediate context and start with something rather strange. I was wondering for each of you how familiar you are maybe with Andy Warhol's work as a filmmaker.
I guess I'm pretty familiar with Andy Warhol, and I've seen like some of his films, and but I guess I think of him in this more like like as a circulatory, or he makes art about like circulation in this way, and I think a lot of times his like work feels like very social. He broke this format in a certain way, but yes, I guess medium familiar.
Well, I guess I'm a bit familiar with his more fictional work, and then after with some of his conceptual, or maybe I should say spiritual films that he made. And yeah.
I thought once I had the opportunity to watch all his films when I was visiting Pittsburgh, and there's
all his films.
Yeah, because in Pittsburgh there's the Andy Warhol Foundation, and actually there's a video room where you can go and watch all the archives. And I was a bit naive because, for instance, Sleep is way too long. But also I had the honor to be shown around the museum, the foundation, by his nephew. And it was, I remembered this while watching Radu's film, because there was like somehow the same dimension as in the cemetery, which is so different to how I know his work from the museums and from art history. And like his nephew wanted to stay in the last floor. He wanted to start there where there are all the family photos, and he wanted to talk about family history, of course. And it was like in the cemetery where there's the big gravestone of the parents, like the family place, and then there's the small Andy Warhol stone, this individual who broke out of the family and who went away from Pittsburgh, but they are trying to capture him again there. Yeah.
It's intimidating. You're basically an expert. Okay.
Only on the family history, not on the films.
Because, right, I mean, because Andy Warhol has his huge aura, right? And there's very little people who actually see it because it's very rarely exhibited, of course. And Radu has become, as he said in the beginning, he at some point became quite fanatical about Andy Warhol, and he kept on rather popularizing him in every public speech. And what's very interesting, of course, is rather the question, why are Andy Warhol's films so much less known compared to, of course, his other artworks? And of course, one of the most obvious reasons is that compared to the art world, there's not that much money that one can make through films, right? Especially through Andy Warhol's films, which are rather complicated and difficult to exhibit, and they're like between 30 seconds and 12 hours. So a very different offer. So of course I was thinking of that while thinking of you, Diane, because you're an artist at large, right? You work in media. And I was wondering, how do you see your film work inside your work at large?
Inside, I guess I see myself as like an image maker. I feel really invested in like the history of photography and kind of like image making at large. And I think actually my films that's kind of where a lot of my films start. It's a response to something. Maybe even like in the way that photography has functioned under photography, and image making has functioned under a specific regime or situation, and how we kind of like build ourselves through images. And so that's like like, so in a way, like the films are about the practice and the practice is about the films. Yeah.
But what about more pragmatic aspects? Like, is it very different to go out in the world with the film rather than a print, rather than something else?
Yeah, I mean, I actually find it like it's a very similar syntax for me. You know, I take things and sometimes I alienate them from their like native environments per se. I kind of like combine certain things. There's almost the same kind of perversion where I want to see different things pushed up against each other, and yeah, one, I guess, operates it more because I make these photographs that are kind of sculptural in the studio. And one, to me, the photographs are almost like the sexual dimension and the films are kind of like the social dimension of maybe a similar thing. Like if the photographs like kind of depict like a physical tension, the films kind of narrate maybe what is happening around this more like a less linguistic space. Does that make sense?
Yeah, narrate is certainly an unexpected way for your films. Okay, but maybe so trying to open it to you guys a bit. Just like, what do you think of that? I mean, do you think it's right? What are other things? And I also think that there are just some films that are very difficult to put out there, and it's rather like people kind of prefer to keep them away.
I thought of something. Can I say something I thought of? Okay. I do feel like with I guess kind of related. I mean, you guys can respond too, but that like there is a difference for me, like between, maybe we should draw the difference between maybe like what I consider like video art, right, versus like film that circulates in a different like. There are obviously a lot of overlaps, but I think maybe a goal moving towards moving image is that, I am interested in kind of like the seams and the structure, and I never actually want to make, when I'm making this film, I actually don't want to make a film. I'm thinking through film language, if that makes sense. Like there's something about it where there is this kind of line that's drawn between what I consider like narrative cinema or even documentary and kind of what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is we kind of hear this a lot, like the subtle difference between video art and cinema. But I always wonder what's really it. Apart from the context in which they are produced, like, okay, the money comes from somewhere.
Well, I think it is like questioning maybe the means of production. From like this, like the most material level to like a social level, and that is something that follows me in the process. This film was definitely the closest to something that is like produced, in film hierarchy that I've done before. But maybe that's what the project was even about.
It's interesting because my question was rather getting there, like why is it that you have to be invented so many other words to define something like difficult filmmaking to be shown on different types of screen, like video art, etc., etc. My question really is rather for Diane's film. Do you think it goes through the same kind of problem like Andy Warhol's films, like some kind of difficulty in showing it on a big screen?
I've seen her work for the first time today, so I don't have the comparison to experience it in an exhibition.
Yeah, sure. My question is rather compared to regular filmmaking, let's say, like just proper narrative, usual filmmaking that you see usually on screen. And what I'm asking is, do you feel there is some kind of strangeness to seeing Diane's film on a big screen that is not like video art or installation format or gallery?
I wouldn't judge that. I thought it was really interesting to watch the two films together because there are so many different levels, like aspects that they unexpectedly share, like without knowing from each other, but that we could observe, this whole question of being an extra or being the protagonist, question of reproduction and trying to capture the aura or Also somehow like using the medium as a mean in order to bring back ghosts or spirits in very different ways. The role animals play in it. Yeah.
That's interesting, but let's get there a bit later. Mathieu, do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, yeah, I guess it's about finding time and space to show different kinds of filmmaking. A couple of months ago, we at the Montreal Critics Week, we had this problem with a great documentary called Exergue on Documenta 14, which was screened last year at the Berlinale and also at the Toronto Festival last fall. It was basically a 14 hours documentary on the making of the Documenta Contemporary Art Film Festival. And I mean, the irony in that is that it's a great film about the crossings of politics and into the funding of the arts, and how politics play always a big role into what is shown, how it is shown, where it is shown, what is the price of admission of these exhibitions. And so we wanted to screen it, and of course it's pretty complicated to get a movie theater for 14 hours for one film. And the irony in that is that we couldn't negotiate the price of the screening below anything below $2,500. So I mean, when you calculate the price of the ticket that you need like to sell that's like kind of break even. It's super ridiculous, and so we dropped the ball. We couldn't show it, and I think that for me it was pretty telling, because that's the kind of price tag that is for the museum world. It's not a thing for movie theaters. It's not a thing for film festivals. So yeah, I mean, like maybe in that there's a part of the answer into how it is difficult to screen these films.
Okay, so maybe let's go. Oh, so it was also different. Maybe you can share a bit about that, right? It was the first time you yourself saw it, or were around the screening at least. How was it like? How did it feel to watch it on a big screen?
I don't know, it's hard. I watched some of the beginning of it, and then I left in the middle, and I came back towards the end. I mean, it's a lot, it feels really intense for me. I mean, I guess when I watch my own work, I become fixated on all the mistakes. That's actually all I can see. So there was something about it that maybe on the big screen, just the scale up, like certain things I was playing with, the music is almost like sometimes not even in service of the image. To me, like the music for the film is always like its own character, and especially for this film, almost like its own time period. A lot of these there's a contemporary time period, the past, the future, and something about the music was kind of intense to hear. Like to fill up this space like this without any kind of like normal audio interruptions you'd have in like a museum. So maybe there's something, like more, I could feel the music separate a lot more from the image, which is something I was kind of trying to do, but that I don't know how I feel about it, but that's how I felt seeing it. Yeah. But I think because the film is kind of about making a film, it also made sense, like in this context with everyone here.
And what about other films? Like what were your thoughts about? Because it's very interesting, because both films are somehow, they kind of like expose themselves at something that shouldn't be seen on the big screen, right? I mean, video art is certainly taught in different ways rather than repeating and very detail oriented, etc., etc. So it's rather every time you see video art on screen, it kind of like feels much more exposed. Maybe.
Yeah.
And Radu's film, it's also about the big screen, the small screen, right? It's also some kind of cinema made out of very small details that we kind of got accustomed of not seeing, right? The webcam, the pixel, things that are now invisible. And somehow the films, I think, kind of have attention in this respect.
I thought it was funny, actually, when I was watching Radu's film, I was like, this should be an installation. And then it's funny, his film plays so much with, like, to me, like, structural, more like conceptual film in an art vein. You know, I could really see it at a museum. I was already fantasizing how it would be installed, how the audience would interact with it, because it is something that you can really walk it, you know, it plays with that language in a way. Mine plays with the language of, say, a narrative film or something, and in a way, like, they were reverse in that way, like that. But his felt like art to me, and maybe within his context of like filmmaking, it's more, you know, that becomes the experiment. And whereas, like, from my context as an artist, where there's a lot of this kind of like more like, I would say, like the poor image as a strategy in the art world is so prevalent that for me, the risk is not using the poor image. The risk is like kind of almost dipping into the more cinematic, like the more pop like language.
That's very interesting that you mentioned it, because your film kind of has an internal tension, right? It's sometimes like it seems like a film made with, well, maybe not a big budget, but a proper budget. Compared to Radu's film, for sure, it seems like Marvel.
It seems like that, but I just want to say the budget was not that big, I think.
Sure, but it's also the way it is edited and the way there are many things that kind of do not allow itself to seem a big budget film, and there's some sort of...
It wants to be beautiful, you know, and Radu's film is like, it's like impressionistic. There's something like about the quality of both works. Like his, I feel like, is actually much more in dialogue with, it's, I don't know why I'm talking about his work so much, but I feel like Impressionism as like a movement in painting was really came on at the advent of photography. You know, like photography being invented is what allowed us to see kind of the blur and to see certain kind of perspectival things, to be able to capture an image. Because before, you know, painting was more about like being commissioned, you know, something that took much longer. And like you kind of, you know, you were commissioned to do something, and then through photography, you could make paintings in a different way. And then it's funny that now he uses the poor image to loop it back to something that's very impressionistic. So that was something I noticed too about the kind of image he was privileging or something.
I kind of thought this same, just strange facts. So Radu told me that the entire zooms and everything, that's the image itself, it's not made by him. So he's not zooming on the image, but it's a mechanical zoom that starts every now and then, just like every, I don't know, 7 minutes or something. There would be a zoom on the grave. So it's rather, he has no, it's really found footage, like he just presses the button and that's it. It's a very interesting tension with him breathing and with him stuff like that. So that's rather the tension with Impressionism. But yeah, interesting. But what I wanted, and I'm insisting on that, is really you giving this kind of polished images, and then kind of taking them back with some sort of very raw way of editing, or very loud music, or things that kind of say it's not an illusion, you guys, wake up, this is made in a grassroots manner rather, and maybe talk about this kind of tension between the surroundings and the actual way of putting them together.
Yeah, it was actually the first time that I'd ever inserted iPhone imagery or like the poor image into my work, you know, because actually, like, so much of I think for the film, I was really exploring like nostalgia, obviously, to some extent, and kind of like where, you know, like in a way, the film is also set in China. It was made in this place that is known for making propaganda films. It's kind of like an entire industry is like where I made it. And so I think like propaganda is no longer this sort of image that we associate with being like super staged. Now I think that there's like so much propaganda in sort of like presenting an idea of the real through the poor image. You know, like where's like I think the real can be really anchored, you know, even as an image through something that's more of a poor image, something that feels like more intimate, more amateur. And so like that to me became like part of like it becomes on the same level as like the polished image and kind of like what it aims to do. Yeah, so I think that's what I was playing with, because I felt like I can't really address propaganda or like self-construction and all these things without seeing what it, you know, like seeing how like the shaky footage, the low res, this sort of iPhone, like what that does to like the overall like self-construction. Yeah.
How did it feel for you to watch Radu's film on the big screen? Just like, you know, because there's always this question if it works better on laptop, this kind of films is the thing people ask about. I don't know if you've seen all these horror films about Skype conversations getting hijacked by ghosts. And also Radu has another film from France. It's like a YouTube recording of a man who wants to commit suicide. And it's a bit similar with Sleep too, also because it's about that, but also because it kind of like, when you watch it on the big screen, of course, you kind of denaturalize it, because it feels like the power of it is to have the impression of reality on the screen, right? Like something that might happen on your laptop, but it's done by someone else. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I think it's actually like brings his comment to Andy Warhol also in between others, no? Like taking something very banal and out of everyday life, like a cheap image that we're used to watch on a cell phone or on a laptop, and put it on the big screen where there's supposed to be a glossy image, but creating a new effect this way. But then, of course, also the effect of really staying there and watching this, which enables me to another experience of watching. Then, of course, as a structural film, I would walk away and cook a tea if I would watch it at home, or in an exhibition, I would perhaps watch it, part of it, but watching it on a big screen also enables really to dive in another dimension.
I watched it this morning on the screener, and it was interesting, but kind of boring.
I think it's quite boring.
No. Honestly, I had a good time. Now, it was interesting. You're kind of captive. You need to stay there. You're in a theater. You paid for the ticket, or like you made space for your. You decided to dedicate your evening to coming to Critics Week and to see the film, so you were watching it. And I guess that it needs that kind of attention to kind of evoke that ghostly feeling of Warhol's grave. It needs that to go beyond the anecdotal that the images, like if you just glance at them, could have, because it's it could be only seen as a joke, you know. And you're watching the kind of best of what he clipped from a year of watching this webcam. But now in a theater, it kind of, at least if it is not a narrative, it at least becomes kind of reflection on how we sometimes try to remember people or kind of an artistic aura, and how it maybe curiously doesn't live up to what it was.
And of course, maybe you know this, Diane. So your film is very interesting when compared to Radu's films, because a few years ago he also made a film about reconstruction of historical events. It's called "I Do Not Care If in History We Go Down as Barbarians," which was a quote of a Romanian general of the Nazi army during the 40s, who gave the orders to exterminate the Jewish population in a concentration camp, and he said that's quote, a long quote. So he makes this film about some sort of very depressing experience of a theater director putting on stage the massacre from Odessa, and of course this speaks very well to your film. But also what I think speaks very well to your film is some sort of general feeling that there's so many times in Radojude's cinema in which you kind of get some sort of very anguishing and desperate feeling, because most of his characters are very overwhelmed by responsibilities, right? Like mundane responsibilities, people who have to spend their entire time working, right? In this most recent, do not expect too much, but also all sorts of other responsibilities, moral responsibilities. You might watch Continental 25 tomorrow. Intellectual responsibilities, and which this is a bit like your film, right? Because your character Iris, she's going through a rather strange process. Like she's kind of going back to the 37 massacre and kind of like asks herself, what is this and what's her place in this entire story, which is not a story that ends in 37, but it's a history of representation, of course, and she's not at the end of it, but she's in the most recent point, and it's very long. So it's kind of interesting, and maybe talk a bit about this. Like, how did you think to tackle this relationship of an actress and an entire history, an almost century-long history of representation?
Yeah, I think one of like the starting points of the film for me, or why I wanted to make it, is because I really wanted to address sort of like this revisionistic impulse and address exactly, you know, like the nostalgia core thing I was talking about, but meaning like, how do we access and frame history now in the contemporary moment, you know, and that changes with every era. And I think, you know, we have this limitless ability to go into the archive, you know, and I think like that, and what we do, like what the aims of that are. And I think I found this sort of interesting intersection with like this revisionistic impulse, whereas in China, the revisionistic impulse would be to create like a unified, like a national story that everyone can kind of like agree on. And then I think the revisionistic impulse in, say, the Western world or in the States is like a lot of times about like recuperating and like kind of like bringing marginalized voices, like making them the protagonists now. You know, it's like, let's just go back in history and put the like oppressed person in power, and this will make us feel better about ourselves. You know, and there's something about like feeling good and the pleasure of kind of like this revisionistic desire. There's always something that's being recuperated that reflects actually the current desire more than, you know, the truth of the past, which is probably inaccessible in some ways. So yeah, thinking through that was like kind of how I approached her character and like the film at large, and just kind of this myth making space. Yeah. I forget what you asked exactly, but
rather like, okay, on one hand it's this, which is rather the intellectual side, but also about her building her as a character, right? I mean, just like what are her thoughts and emotions about getting close to this?
Yeah, I mean, it's something she didn't experience herself, and I think we all have relationships to events and stories, like images. That we did not experience ourselves, but that we use to liberate ourselves from ourselves. You know, there's this sort of like, she needs this event also to this event where, you know, and I think it really comes together at the end where she's like dancing with the soldiers, because in a way she needed them in order to feel her own power, you know, and so I think there's like a pleasure there that I was interested in exploring with her. And yeah, I think it's just more about this like codependency that we have, like, and I think I was just trying to address that kind of like dialectic, you know, of like and I think with like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with like the 1937 like Nanjing massacre, but it's kind of like the Holocaust story of China and of East Asia, and that story has been like reiterated so many times, and oftentimes in a way that like uses women as like a symbolic like purity, and it's a survivor's tale, and it's like meant to bring people like closer together. So I think like that's how her personality is built, is because she's like from that environment, and I guess presumably also grew up with these stories and knows the power like embedded in like surviving and being that character. She's grown up with that image.
But she's also an extra, right? You mentioned this when you said the films are interesting to compare, because of course a film about Andy Warhol will always be a film about a great artist and kind of big protagonist of the 20th century, while your character is of course an extra, like it's right?
Yeah, I mean, in real life, she's more of like an indie actress. She's probably not going to have this like mainstream success, and she takes her work very seriously. I mean, I really respect her as like a person or as an actor. But I think it was also addressing the extras thing, because I feel like a lot of the filmmaking it almost felt like an intervention into this like the Hollywood of China space, into the means of production of like a historical image. Like it really felt like there's this very well like oiled system that I kind of just entered, and I kind of had to say, yeah, I'm making the same thing you are, but different. Or like there's like the soldiers, the sets, like all of that has already been used to make another like kind of to make many other anti-Japanese war films. And so the extra thing has a lot to do with like the labor that's involved in Hangdian, which is like a lot of the actors are just like migrant workers, and Hangdian used to be like farmland. And then, I was telling you guys before, but at a certain point it became like you could make more money playing a farmer than actually being a farmer. And so just like I think the labor of making an image in that space like is way more like just the material history of that is like kind of, I think that's what I was trying to comment on by focusing on the extra and the idea of like not being part of the system, but not being like able to like benefit from it in the way that you would imagine.
It's just a reminder to you guys that at any point you have a question for Diane.
Yeah, I would like to ask something to Diane. So you live in New York, you were born in the US, and you told us before that you traveled to Warsaw from Berlin for another show of a work that you shot actually in Warsaw, but you also worked in Vietnam where your father is working. So you are working in many different places that are more or less foreign to you. And I wonder if there's like if you have like a theory on this, or where you see yourself as an artist or author, like in relation to this like traveling. Or in other words, this particular work that we saw now, how is it different from if a Chinese director would have done that, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, I think about it a lot, because especially like when I made this first video, I made it in Vietnam, and it felt really weird actually to bring back to New York. And I think about these politics of circulation a lot, and kind of like what it means to appropriate, to expropriate, when like the confrontation is organic and when it's like a little forced, in dealing with like an other or something that's not yours technically. And but one time I went to this like talk by Trinity Minh, who's like this post-colonial film theorist, and someone was like, because she made this really famous video work in Senegal, and people were like, oh, like, what did those people think of the film after you made it, the people in Senegal? And she said something where she was like, I don't need to answer to the regime under which like I made the work. or there's something about it that there's something complex in that answer, like that I've thought about like a lot over the years, especially when I feel like maybe there's something that like, I don't know, it's like, I also feel like wary of the pressure to make like biographical work and just like how to kind of evade that a little bit. So that's kind of part of like the thinking. But I do think like a lot of these things are like happenstance in that, I got a commission in China. So I knew I was making and I had wanted to make, this was something I was interested in. But then when I was in China, I became like totally China pilled. Like, when I'm in the environment, I also become kind of like very immersed in it. And I think I just really wanted to make something that was like in dialogue with China, if that makes sense. And I think it's like, and actually the film a lot to me is about like, to me, China is almost like an actress in that there's this sort of predetermined script and people are always questioning China's authenticity, and it's like the tension of China, is China real or is China fake, is like something I was also just exploring with the film at large. And I think it's interesting to enter a space and to actually deal with your preconception of the space rather than, I don't see myself as like a research-based artist necessarily, not because I don't do research, but because I really think it's important to incorporate, the preconception and the perception and the outside perception. So like, I think making the film in China, I was very aware of like a Western perception of China and how to work through that. So like, it's all these layers, but I think because I make images, I think about perception a lot, on this like social level. Yeah, it's always complicated, but I think it's important to like, it's important for me to have like intimacy with something, also like the actual means of production, or always feel, I try to keep it pretty organic and like to scale. And, I don't know, everything is like a little different. Like in Diane, it was crazy because I felt like I was the only like woman to ever be on set there. And it was like a very masculine like space where these films were being made.
So maybe who's Iris? Like, is she? So she is an actress who you incorporated in the project after casting, and how did your collaboration go on with her? What's her real? I mean, you said you had a predetermined script. Is it all the script? Is it also maybe improvisation?
Yeah, it was almost all improvisation. And I think like one thing is that I would, when I interviewed her when she was, the script that she was reading, she was actually oftentimes reading for the first time or rehearsing that repetition, And then with the interviews, like at the kitchen table, in the car, I would tell her, I think my main directive was always like, okay, imagine you're being interviewed. And I think like that level of projection felt very organic, because like she is like, she's like a 26-year-old girl who's like on the internet a lot. And she, so like, of course, she would already be imagining like this, she's seen like, thousands of people get interviewed in a certain way. So I think like I was really dealing with her projection of that, of what it means to be interviewed, of what it means for someone to show interest in what you're saying and to kind of project further out. Like, she can kind of see how the image would circulate and what it looks like. And so that to me was so much part of the performance, was like dealing with her own aspirations and her own projections. Yeah.
Maybe I do a rebound on that. Like when I saw the program first this morning and then after tonight, it got me thinking about. During the first film, we are having it's a film about, let's say, the godfather of pop art, and the second film is using, I'd say, pop idol aesthetics up to a certain point. It's like very pop and very in a very let's say like quote unquote Asian way. And while seeing this, I couldn't. I was thinking about how pop art usually works, which is it always starts with a certain type of context. You need to understand the context where it was first made, and it is always kind of related to the context where it is seen. And it brought me to the concept of acknowledgement and the acknowledgement of history, and how through the seeing of this grave, we are seeing people who are kind of on a quest in a certain way, because like, why would you drive, I don't know how many kilometers to go to Andy Warhol's grave? I guess it's to touch a part of art history in a kind of way. And then after, in your film and in her time, we're also in this kind of, I'd say, kind of paradox, where where you want to conjure history and at the same time question how it was transmitted through generations, through media. And when I speak about the concept of acknowledgement, it takes me back to, I don't know if the European audience is familiar with that, but in Canada and also in the States, when most of the time when we do a cultural event or official event or institutional event, most of the time it starts with a land acknowledgement. That is aimed toward the native people who were there before. For example, in Montreal, we always acknowledge that it was an unceded territory of the Ganinga people. And of course, the idea of acknowledgement of genocide, I guess, is also at the heart of the second film. I mean, of course, there's, we're in Berlin. The city is acknowledging the Holocaust by many different means. There's lots of monuments around the city. We all know the politics of the Berlinale in the last couple of days, what they were towards that and what they were towards the muting of the acknowledgement of the Palestinian genocide. So, I mean, while watching your film, I couldn't not think about all that. And I couldn't not think about how your film, in a certain way, kind of acknowledged schizophrenic history, or a schizophrenic way of how history is produced and how it is consumed and how it is produced through your film. So I was wondering regarding your actress, and for example, the scenes that I'd say are in the last half of the movie, when we see, for example, Japanese soldiers kind of having a rave or a party, how she felt toward that, and how you, because I mean the actress is great, and I think your film does a great job at walking this fine line, where we understand that it's kind of a satire of how we remember history, but I mean it's I guess it's not an easy thing to do, and takes a lot of courage to kind of put your the image in the film, put a finger into that wound.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that, I guess in there's a scene where there's sort of almost a metaphorical, I mean, I guess it happened in history, but in the film, it's sort of a metaphorical rape, I guess, that occurs in the torture through materials, through objects, and kind of, and I think maybe sometimes they use objects to stand in for things, but also the objects themselves really carry all these layers of meaning. There's something, maybe the risk, and I remember when I was making it, that the risk was her pleasure with the soldiers, that in a way, I mean, but also there is a certain pleasure, I mean, imagine any person or group of people where they've been told you were victimized, you were victimized, you were victimized over and over again, and what it means to kind of actually to know that as your kind of general identity, to kind of that's where your purity lies in people feeling sorry for you, and I think so conversely, the only way you can actually gain power is by entering that role that's been kind of designated to you. And I think that can be a reoccurring loop, and that was kind of a little, the risk of it. That's really what veered it off from the traditional telling of the story, is that just her agency is through her awareness, and her agency is through her own empowerment and like her own pleasure.
The pleasure in what? The pleasure in being part of this film, or the pleasure in rather questioning?
Yeah, the pleasure in performing pain, you know, the pleasure in pain as a performance, I think is like, I'm not saying it's good or bad, but I'm saying that like for an individual person, say, stuck within this script, this predetermined script, where she is the victim, like I think there's something about performing it, like where is the agency in a predetermined script, right? Where does the agency lie when there's a character set out for you and there are words for you and there's, you know, so like the agency, I think that's what I was trying to like locate and narrativize or something, is like, where is her agency in all of it? And yeah, I mean, there's like, you can be making a film about anything and have some kind of pleasure from like memorizing lines, you know, there's something like formal about it. There's something that's just technical, and like how those things blind us to like the actual, you know, the root cause or the meaning. And so I think it was just about playing with all those things to see how like an individual can fit within like this broader system. And I think that's why she says that thing like, if I hadn't created my own world, I would have died in someone else's. And in a way, like I feel like that line is kind of like very true for her.
That's very true also for national myths, you know?
Yeah, and exactly. And I think in a way, it's like, yes, like it's like about China, you know, it's like China maybe could only survive through a certain kind of isolationism, through its own world building, through, you know, through all the things that maybe you could also criticize about it. It also needed that in order to be what it is. So that I think there was some overlap for me when I like was thinking through that statement.
I'm very curious about two things. I'm very curious how this were, if you've seen any Japanese depiction of this were. I'm very curious how you see Diane's film as a film also about filmmaking.
Two very different questions. Well, the thing is, just really quickly about the Japanese one, I don't know if there is a version. No, I don't think so. Because like in the 90s, there's this woman, Iris Chang, who wrote this book called The Rape of Nanking, which I kind of was an inspiration point. And she wrote this like very like expose, you know, she was like, you know, it was like a weirdly like a mainstream, like it was on the bestsellers list for a long time. And actually at the peak of her success, she drove over this, like on the side of the road, and she like killed herself because she felt like she started getting very like paranoid towards, she was only, I think in her 30s or maybe my age when this happened. And like, she felt like no matter, like, you know, she was a truther in this way. I don't think the book is like super well written, but it is like just very it's really just an expose about this event that she feels like has been totally buried by history. And she kind of felt like, oh, towards the end of her life, like, oh, the CIA is in collusion with the Japanese government. Like, no matter how popular the book got, there was never like a formal apology from Japan that like to acknowledge the event. And so I think like that frustration for her, like, I think it's also about, to me, it was also about someone taking on the trauma of their own research, or taking on like the trauma embedded in their research so much that, you know, and it's kind of the same thing that Iris, the actress, does, or that confusion between what's like performance, what's rehearsal, what's life, kind of all starts blurring. And so it was kind of rooted in Iris Chang's like frustrations and where she felt like she failed. So yeah, I don't think there's been like a Japanese depiction of the same thing. There's been like a really problematic like American one, I think. It's called like Flowers of War. I watched a little bit of it when I was researching this film, and it kind of centers how like this white priest guy, I forget who he's played by a famous actor, kind of is the one to save the women. It's just, the whole thing is just centered around like Western intervention. Yeah.
Yeah, I would still like to understand a bit the different layers of your film, because at the beginning I thought there was there was some kind of observational following to the protagonist, and at the same time of the ongoings in this studio city. But then actually those extras started to perform for your camera, and I wondered if there was ever a document, like an observation of things that happened independently. But the more the film went on, I felt that it was your production. Like, so there were those different registers of like a fictional, like fragments of a fictional fiction. That come together with the text rehearsals, which I wondered where they were coming from, the text that the protagonist is actually repeating and turning by memory. And then there's also this voiceover, which I was not sure is your voice.
It's her voice.
It's her voice.
Yeah.
And it's like it's more like it has like the texture of a diary.
Yeah, it's like kind of a more. I guess I gave her her own POV. Like it kind of has a confessional quality to it. It's the thing is, like, I had made a version in China, and that's where it first showed in a museum in China. Then it was brought over to the States, to New York, and I actually added that layer because I kind of wanted to protect the work a little bit. Like I wanted, I just didn't want people in New York to watch the film and think like, oh, this is like something that's happening far away, or like this is like a story about this thing, or it's about the massacre, it's about being an actress in China. I wanted to make it feel like I wanted to, make it matter in a slightly different way. And I also wanted to integrate this new POV, which is real, which is that she is aware now. She was really excited that the film was going to New York, but she was also kind of nervous. And I think I wanted to like add that layer to the film because in a way it's to like protect the context, to also make it more real in some ways, even though it's like also fabricated to some extent. But yeah, so that was added a bit later. Sorry, I forget the other.
No, I was like trying to to understand the elements.
I think the question is everything fictional in the film, right?
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't put it this way because but made up for your production. Like there's no production that is independent from your production.
Yeah. I think I was dealing in a way with like almost like the ready-made. Maybe that's how it relates to the Warhol like thing, is like a lot of my my videos are always about combining things that are already, I've only ever worked with people who like want to be on camera or want to be, so I play with that, their aspirations more than any, I don't know if that sounds bad, but, and so like Hung Dian already exists as a place, she is an actress. These films do happen, and then I think like I just combine these things and put them like in like such close proximity with each other that maybe something different can occur. I also obviously bring on my own, what she's wearing, we sort of picked together, sort of didn't, she actually was sleeping in that apartment that I filmed her in, it was just, it's all very mixed, but I would say like, I think there is something in me that's a bit like, I would say like anti-documentary, or, like not like anti-index, I guess. And so the formal experiment with me for the film was like, oh, how can I play with the aesthetics of documentary, which oftentimes documentary is an aesthetic, like an aesthetic form. Also, there's an aesthetic to what truth is supposed to look like. So how can I play with that in service of like an image, like in service of an image that is like actually created, and to feel that creation. So I'm not trying to hide the fact that I made things happen, it's part of it. Like, but yeah, it was more about playing.
Yeah, maybe closer to her activity also to record social media videos, which started somehow with the with the proposition to document your own life, but we all know that actually it's a whole like activity, like producing videos that somehow represent your private, virtual, official internet identity.
But there's also something more that's Warholian about your film, right? Because in the end, she's an extra. You just kind of like follow the film, and she talks a lot, and it's very intense and sometimes emotional and sometimes intellectual. Like it seems like she's trying to figure some things out. And of course, after some time, you're kind of like, why does it matter? Who are you? Like it's kind of, and this is very Andy Warhol in a way, right? Because he was going to these people who were kind of like underground stars, but that meant nothing really in the New York, of course, reality. And he was treating them in a way with the same gaze and attention and patience as it would be with the star. And you would hear people talking for 3 hours and you're never really sure why do you listen to them, but there's something fascinating in this kind of confusion. Like there's somebody who's unimportant maybe, but has something to say, but not in a very overt manner. It's interesting.
Yeah. And there's something I think just like in the making of it that just feels so intimate, you know, the exchange of energy, like the attention you can give someone and like putting the camera on them. And, you know, like, I think, you know, there's something about like, yes, you can like distrust the camera and you can do it, but there is something where it can make people feel very seen and very complete, you know, in the way that they want to be seen. To be in that with someone, I think is like really powerful. And I think that's also something that like my work elaborates on, like as my whole practice, versus say the camera as something that exposes, the camera as something that captures and shoots, and you know, like all these kind of more violent, like indexical things with the camera. So I'm just like, how does the camera, you know, actually, how do we use it to construct ourselves and like
It's very just this, and we'll open. I'll give you the chance as well, and then we'll open to the public. It just reminded me, Kazuo Hara. He's a very well known Japanese documentarist, and he has this very interesting theory, because this is a question that all big documentaries are being asked at some point, right? Like, do your subjects know they're being filmed? What's your rather like philosophy about watching people? Is it moral? Is it no? And he says that he even thinks it's better for the people to know they're being filmed, because the way he sees it, it's like, I'm giving you 5 minutes to define yourself for eternity. And this, he believes, brings something more true in the human being than observing the person for 12 days and then selecting a certain moment would do. And that's interesting compared to your ideas, which are similar. Okay, Mathieu.
The first film, if we go back to the first film for me kind of acts as a methodology to see as a methodology to see the second one. Meaning, like when I saw the Radu's film, it opens with this quote by Andy Warhol telling, "The most wonderful thing about living is to be dead." And I mean, of course, one needs to be alive to say such a thing, but also one needs to be kind of, I guess, in a privileged position to say something like this. One needs to not fear death or not think about death every day, or like in a very urgent manner, you know. In the same way that when one, I mean, it's also a privileged position to think about history. Because like when you're able to think about history is because you're not fearing the present at some point. And I was wondering in regards to all that, how did you? Because of course you were filming into like this big Chinese studio, and this big Chinese studio has lots of extras on hand, and you're also filming the trajectory of an aspiring actress. Which I guess, if she's aspiring, I don't think she makes a living out of his actress job. And so I was wondering, how did you feel? And I guess I'm going back a bit because there's kind of an overarching theme to this edition of Critics Week, which is back to the class issues of class war and class struggle. How did you felt this kind of relationship between, I'd say, like this cheap labor, like cheap labor of the film industry, and how they had been instrumentalized by Chinese production to tell this official story, and how did you feel offering them this kind of, I don't know, like other version of it?
But also, I would add, who are these people in your films? Like, did they actually take part in the production itself of your film, or how was it?
You mean the extras, or
the same extras Mathieu is referring to? Yes.
Yeah, I mean the extras were the soldiers, and they like a lot of them had never been even that close to a camera before. And just to give some context, which I gave you guys before, is like a lot of these extras are migrant workers. Maybe some of them do have dreams of, say, being a star or being seen, but like what happens is that they just end up playing like a body on screen very far away. They're just there to fill in the background. And a lot of these men like will be in like many productions simultaneously where they're just playing the same role, which is like a Japanese soldier who dies. And so they just die and die and die. Speaking of like death is like something that they're like acting out all the time. And and so when I was filming them, I brought the camera a lot closer to them because I also couldn't really afford that many, so it's just like they were, I also wanted to get close to them and focus in on them. And I had actually all these like different like things I wanted them to do, but I realized that most of them were just like terrified of being on camera because they had never been that close to it. And then when the camera would get close, they would just start like laughing and kind of freaking out. And like, I was just, it got to the point where I actually was just getting angry at them every day because no one could be close to the camera. And I felt like this is so confusing. So then I ended up playing with that. So, you see them kind of like making weird expressions sometimes, or, there's a reason why they're smiling in that circle shot because they weren't supposed to smile, but then like, they just kept, one of them would laugh every single time. And so like, I was like, you know what, everyone just stay smiling to kind of compensate for the people who couldn't be on camera. And so yeah, there are all these things. I mean, in regards to like and also what's interesting is like a lot of these extras have accounts on Bilibili where they live stream their life as an extra, and a lot of them make more money doing that than actually being an extra. So there are all these like kind of layers of like image production happening, even in the failure to be in the official image. There's something that can be recuperated there. And I mean the class thing is, I mean, I think Mei Xian, the actress, she's like so talented, and there's actually just not the right, there's not the right outlet for her yet. And we are, she sometimes teaches acting. She's like taken on a lot of jobs, and like even earlier this year, she was like working at a coffee shop and then also acting. It's like, it's complicated and it's hard to know, what like my role in that was, except like that I let her be, not let her, but she was main character, and she did get to like go to the premiere of the film in like a museum where you can be around, in a room full of people. So there's things that I don't know. I don't think like the point is for me to like give her, I don't know if I can provide like a new economic structure for her, but maybe I can like, I don't know. We just have like everything about how the film was made, I think was very different than what like the soldiers, everyone that was part of the production kind of like thought it was pretty weird. Like, or even like the soldiers dancing to get them to do that, it was like a whole conversation. I think just in general, there was like I had to be much closer. I was much closer to these like bodies that are normally much further away. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'm just saying this is very interesting because Radu's film is also very much about work, right? I mean, Andy Warhol also has this very bad reputation of actually kind of using other people's ideas and works and just like signing his name on them. So kind of like seeing this film in which there's so many workers that actually have to take care of his grave, just like to keep it for his posterity. He's long dead, right? And these people keep on cleaning the thing, and tourists come and probably pay money to see it. It's also an interesting dialogue. Okay, so now's your chance. We're opening to the public.
I can already start. I prepared. I'm curious about the relation between the films about which you talk, but often in reference to Andy Warhol, and not so much in reference to Radu Jule's work, which I find very interesting. Well, and obviously his success as a filmmaker is connected to the fact how he addresses politics and the way he tells about political realities in his films, like how he uses humor, satire, and how he often goes against good taste, we could say, maybe, through his characters, how they speak, how he creates situations which are sometimes, I don't know, somewhere between embarrassing and hilarious and dead serious. So he's a master in like surfing the lines of good taste, I would say, in negotiating political trauma and also history. And I'm curious, like when you watched Diane's film, and maybe also when you, Diane, watch other films, or when you think about your own work, like how do you relate yourself as spectators to this question of how far can a film go when it comes to how politics or political realities could be depicted? Like, is there something, is there a moment when you draw a line, or how did you, like the others, when you watched Diane's film, think about it? Like, did you feel she was going too far or crossing a line for you in how she decided to represent war or historical trauma? Were there irritations when you watched the films? I'm curious.
I mean, it's interesting because she's not representing war, right? She's representing representations of war, and somehow, like, they are silly even if they're good, right? I mean, even if you do like a masterpiece about war and you do this kind of illusion of narrative in which, you know, you are in 44 fighting and you believe it all, it's still stupid to make in a way. I mean, it has the same, not stupid, of course, but it has the same absurdity, right? It's just like we meet in a studio in 2025 and we play pretend, we have silly costumes, and we want to tell stories that we could mostly tell with other very contemporary narratives, but it's always safer to talk about the past. Radu Jude, he loves this quote from J. Haberman. It's, I don't know if you know Laszlo Nemes, after Son of Saul, he made a period piece, an interbellum drama about the rising anti-Semitism in Hungary, interbellum Hungary. And J. Haberman wrote a review and he said that he doesn't really understand this kind of endeavor. Like, if you want to make a film about intolerance and you're Laszlo Nemes living in Hungary, why don't you make a film about contemporary Hungary? Like, why do you have to get all these people to wear costumes and act very silly trying to like find the accurate language people spoke 100 years ago, than just to make a very simple film about something that you actually want to tell? So the short answer is it's interesting. Of course, there's many provocative moments, but at the same time, you know, this kind of fiction making is silly in itself, and it has very absurd moments, even when it's very good. Just imagine how silly it must have been to be on Steven Spielberg's set. Yeah.
I mean, I guess at first I was, I kind of feared, like being irritated because of, I guess, the subject and the playfulness of the form. But as the film went on, and as I understood how it was a representation of a representation, and how it was like this kind of film within a film, and then you understand when the actress is saying how, because she has created this world for herself, basically she can survive in it, or like when you have like this Winnie the Pooh figure that like kind of enters the story and like becomes this kind of like, I don't know, like the kind of reverse shot of like the official like discourse, or I mean that would be another question. Like what about the Winnie the Pooh, which I found super interesting, because if you don't know, Winnie the Pooh is banned in China because like so many people are making jokes about Xi Jinping looking like Winnie the Pooh. So then like I asked myself a lot of questions while watching the film about like this kind of balancing act between, I'd say, like the playful and the deathful, and then asking myself like, can it be a balancing act? And I think you are like, as you said it by speaking of Hadujud's work, like you are like going through these lines like very like with a lot of agility, I guess. But at the same time, it's perilous.
I think that I think you talked about this at the beginning. I think there is no other way like tackling history than like it's inevitable that it creates a sense of us, or a sense of we like creating a collective identity. That's the like you cannot write a dialogue about history. Like you cannot tackle history without like excluding this identity that is built. And then of course you can go against it, but which is necessary which is of course eventually necessary, but also going against it just because it can also be a problem. I think I think we I think we're in a point of history maybe where like asking ourselves which is the us that we can create with our like looking at history is way more important than the individual effort of differentiation. But I think this is what is still a bit oniric for me in the film, since it's so meta, and like the representation of the representation of the representation, I'm still a bit confused about this position of creation of identity that is happening in your work, like going there to the studio city, tackling this particular historical trauma, relating to it, you as an author and director, through this actress, which again comes like from another historical background than you. So for me, still not. I cannot still really make a meaning out of it in question to this historical discourse.
But is it because it was intended? Yeah, just in a second. Is it because it was intended for a Chinese audience? Like, is it so slippery in meaning for European audiences because it was made in China and many things that are in the film are self-understood for a Chinese spectator, or not?
Yeah, I mean that's definitely true. Is that because I made it in China and I was also trying to have it not be censored, which is like also its own thing. I think there were just so many things that you can just take for granted because people would immediately understand. You know, even the fake Winnie the Pooh thing, maybe people don't pick up on, but like that felt more clear in that context. There were more like kind of puns, or the absurdity felt maybe a little different. But yeah, I don't know. Like, were you kind of asking like where I am in relation to like where the
no,
makers?
I don't know if it's really a question. It's more like a comment. I mean, you can talk about it if you want, but also not.
But come with an answer later, and also then we can. Okay.
Hi. Thank you so much for this great film and then really inspiring conversation. So my question comes from, I really would like to hear more backstory about how you actually decided to screen this as a film, because I saw it at Whitney. I loved it. I loved the performative aspect of the whole installation. It was so different to see it now in this black box in a cinema without ribbons, without beds. So I wonder what you think of the merits of these two very contrasting modes of exhibition. And please tell us more about, like, do you plan to show this more as a film? Because it's apparently labeled as like a world premiere. What are your thoughts about this? Thanks.
Yeah, like I think this has happened before where I show something in an installation and then sometimes it circulates in the theater. I mean, I just, I already am so like try to control everything. Maybe that's one thing I don't control and I'm kind of curious. Like, of course I love seeing it, I think, like in a theater. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because originally when I made it, I actually intended the film to be only like 20 minutes long because I knew it was going to be in an installation. But then I felt like the only way I could actually fully comment on the thing I was trying to comment on is actually take on the form. It's almost like, I feel like for me, the film is cosplaying as a film. I don't know if that adds like another meta layer, but it really felt like, okay, the only way I can do this is by making it as long as a film to kind of play up the like sort of the idea that it's a cinematic thing. So maybe actually it being in a theater is its final form, that this is where she would have like wanted it to be or something, that was maybe her. Like, yeah. But it is different, but maybe this is, I mean, I don't pick one or the other, but I did make it originally with the installation in mind. Yeah.
Well, I actually would like to go back to the question or the comment before regarding as well the questions about what layers we have here. And I think I've seen the film now for the third time, and what shocked me this time is that it's getting more and more melancholic to the end when you really follow the protagonist. And I think what I found out this time was actually this melancholy about feminist of female identity, about actually the massacre and as a rape, how do you call it, rape? Yeah. Attacks, which is a weapon in war. And I think this is something with all the staging of the acts she's doing is something which is for me getting a lot clearer this time when I've seen it. And I think this sort of melancholy struck me this time. So it's not really a question, it's more a comment and something I realized just with this third screening now.
Yeah, and I think actually it's really funny, but when it premiered in China, it was the same time that Barbie came out, and I think a lot of the audience members who went to see it had also just seen Barbie, and so there were a lot of comments actually, and you have to understand it's also a different context about I saw comments online too. It's just like, oh, why does she hate men? Or it seems like this film is about hating men, or why are the men depicted in such a disgusting way? There was actually this very feminist conversation that was happening that was really surprising to me, and so that impact felt really different there, like what it meant for even me to make it, or the way it was dealing with the rape and the sexual violence or something. Yeah.
In the closing remarks? Petra?
Yeah, I actually wanted to invite everybody to the bar that we could maybe follow up the conversation.
Absolutely. Okay, great. So that was really interesting. Thank you so much. Thank you for participating, and let's have a drink afterwards.